So the idea of the role of a coach in CS:GO has been debated multiple times ever since Valve made their rule to limit coach communication way back in late 2016. Those of you who are not familiar with the history of coaching in CS:GO, I myself don't know all of the finer details. I think the first time I remember hearing something about coaching was when Hellraisers actually employed Blade as a coach to prepare for a major, and this was basically in late 2014 that this took place. This was, I believe, November 2014 as they were preparing for the DreamHack Winter Major that year, and he had at the time been playing with a team called DAT, and then I guess either he left or got removed, whatever the case may be. He was the team captain of DAT and was a notable in-game leader in the CIS region. Hellraisers had basically brought him on board to prepare for DreamHack Winter that year in late 2014, and from that point forward, you essentially saw coaching really spread throughout the CSGO scene. One of the more famous cases of coaching was actually Peacemaker, who had coached Brazilian team Tempo Storm, that was formerly Games Academy, and helped that team kind of start rising up throughout 2016, eventually causing him to become the coach of Team Liquid, which was one of the first rosters at the time who were basically in this mode of trying to transition their roster to being a bunch of very skilled players, and then having the coach do the in-game leading from the coaching position. And throughout the years, what coaches were allowed to do varied, and the demands that teams had made of tournament organizers to really kind of facilitate the idea of coaching change, where it used to be that maybe coaches would just travel the team and kind of help them out, prior to matches, to then all of a sudden coaches were standing behind teams on stage, and when they would be able to talk to their team was kind of debated upon whether or not they should be able to do it continuously or only during freeze time or only during timeouts. And then it got to a point where coaches were also wanting their own PC, certainly in practice rooms, but also even maybe having their own PC on stage so they could see all the player POVs very easily and be able to communicate with their team through the microphone and basically be kind of like a sixth player almost on stage, having their own setup and everything like that. And there was a little bit of give and take on whether or not that was given or not. And basically what we saw was the coaching role kind of develop into this idea of actually maybe becoming a team's captain or a team's tactician. Again, someone that would actually do all of the in-game leading for the 5 players playing on the server and kind of free them up to not have to worry about using one of their 5 player slots for a true IGL. It could be done from the coach position. And there probably was some disagreement and debate about this, of course, but Valve finally stepped in and made their big rule to all this in late 2016, I believe it was August, where essentially they had felt that the game should be 5 players only, that there shouldn't be 6 players. And so they felt that the coaching role had really kind of gotten out of hand. And so essentially their ruling at the time was that the coach would only be able to communicate with players during warm-up prior to the match starting, at halftime, when we're switching sides, and then during one of 4 30-second timeouts that the coach or player can call. And that was it. That was what Valve decided to come out and do, was just really limit coaching to these very specific time slots. And there was a lot of pushback on this. I mean, there was basically, I think, kind of 3 camps that kind of came out of this whenever people were reacting to this Valve rule. On the one hand, people didn't want any ruling at all. People were really hoping to go the route that a lot of teams were about to go, and it was several teams. It wasn't just Team Liquid. I think Navi was even kind of going this direction with their coaching situation, and many different teams were kind of moving in a way where they were hoping to have their IGL be a coach. I mean, famously, Sean Garrett was maybe going to be the coach of Cloud9. They were going to pick up Get Right, and there was a lot of different things like this, and so a lot of people didn't want to see anything happen. They were completely against any idea of restricting coaches. They wanted coaches to be able to communicate at all times and basically be an IGL. That was one camp. Another camp was maybe in favor of Valve's rule. Maybe they felt that coaching had gone too far and needed to be extremely limited. And obviously teams had their own biases and personal reasons for this. If you didn't have enough infrastructure to be able to hire a full-time coach for your team because maybe you were in a smaller organization that didn't have the budget, then you were obviously at an extreme disadvantage to maybe teams that did have coaches. And so obviously if you were kind of playing from behind in that regard, you had every incentive to not want there to be coaches. Or if you had like a really, really good IGL who was also a solid player and you didn't really feel like your team needed to go the route of picking up a 6th person to in-game lead the team so you can have 5 skilled players because you already had a very skilled player who's also a really good IGL, like a Fallen at the time perhaps back in the day, then you were thinking, well, what the hell? Like, I have a competitive advantage right now because I don't need a coach. Like, we had the tactics and we have all the skill that we could need to be a really good team. Why should we allow our competitors to be able to kind of even the playing field by bringing in a coach who can also be a tactician and kind of make up for their shortcomings and maybe help them kind of catch up along the way? So there were probably a lot of people out there who were against the idea of coaching at all, or at the very least, they were probably pretty happy with Valve's ruling about this to limit the impact a coach could have and kind of stop them from losing their edge, so to speak. But then there was the middle middle ground. And I feel like this middle ground, this potential compromise, has been building consensus over time, which was the idea of we should make coaching more like traditional sports. And so therefore, coaches should be able to communicate with their team during freeze time. Kind of like a coach might call a play in American football between plays on the field, or different things along those lines, or teams obviously are giving signals and stuff, even like in basketball and different things of that nature. And so there is more communication that takes place besides just what happens in timeout and pregame and halftime and postgame and things of that nature. And so really, what I think we were seeing the demand for was, yes, coaches should not be able to talk at all times like an in-game leader would be able to do, but they should not be limited to just only being able to communicate during timeouts and pregame and halftime. They should also be able to communicate during freeze time, because this allows them to have more of a coaching role, be more of a true coach, rather than only someone who can come in here and there. But it still kind of satisfies the idea that the game will still be about the 5 players on the server. They won't be able to get any assistance from their coach in mid-round decision-making when all the chaos is going on and they're having to call audibles or make really quick reactionary adjustments. The coach won't be able to facilitate those things, other than what he's been able to provide in practice with setting up their protocols, things of that nature. But yeah, give them some chances to talk during freeze time. Don't just completely neuter the coaching role, basically. And I feel like this has been a very popular opinion across almost everyone. Like, I don't really see anyone really arguing against this point. In fact, many tournament organizers have already moved this direction anyway. Like, Valve's majors and their major system may still follow the rule of coaches only being able to talk during these 4 30-second timeouts or, halftime or pregame. But many tournaments on the circuit have basically gone the route of letting coaches talk during freeze time. Letting them be more involved in the game than just the timeouts. And I don't know all organizers who do this, but I know for a fact DreamHack has done this for some time, because I've worked at many of the DreamHack events over the last few years as an analyst and a commentator, and I'm very aware that this is the way that they do things. And it doesn't seem like many people have issues with it. It doesn't really seem like there's been this demand to not allow this to happen at these different tournaments on the circuit. But again, we know that when Valve Major time rolls around, that the rules change and everything's different. And this is kind of a difference, right? Because most tournament organizers have kind of just followed suit with Valve's rulings throughout the years. Like, when Valve has made a change to the major map pool, all the leagues and tournaments follow suit. And of course, you would want to do that because you don't want teams having to worry about, preparing for a certain map pool from one tournament. But then for the Valve majors and other tournaments, they have to prepare for completely different map pools. So when it came to like this kind of competitive integrity almost in a way, and kind of keeping things a little bit more organized and uniform across the entire scene, they've really had to follow suit with Valve's rules. And of course, you want to play nice with Valve, because if you ever want to host a major, you don't want to sour that relationship. Hell, even some people at times were really kind of second guessing whether or not they should let some of these Valve banned players play in tournaments and leagues and things of that nature throughout the years when the match fixing thing kind of happened with all the different players that were involved in that. So there's always been kind of this tiptoeing between whether or not to follow Valve's rulings across the entire tournament circuit, or whether to let the open circuit have its own rules and dictate its own things. And then, yeah, Valve will have their specialized rules for their major, but we still want to be able to have the freedom to kind of do things that we want to do on the open circuit. And there's been this balancing act of how far you want to go with that, because again, you don't want the players in the scene overall having to prepare for almost 2 completely different versions of Counter-Strike between the major circuit and the open circuit outside of it. And coaching has been kind of one of the examples of where TOs have kind of just went ahead and kind of made, more, I guess, liberal and more accepted, honestly, coaching rules, again, as we've already discussed. And this basically has come back up again because, we had the whole situation with the ESO1 Road to Rio where, DK and others had reported that there was apparently a vote going around whether or not to allow coaching at all for ESO1 Road to Rio. And apparently it was going to have to be a unanimous decision with all the teams voting. And, it was essentially the options would be that you would allow coaches to be involved or you wouldn't allow them to be involved at all. But then how would you enforce that? And really, you can't enforce specialized coaching rules in the online environment, because you can sit here and say all that you want, well, coaches can only talk during freeze time or talk during timeouts. Well, you don't really know what the hell people are doing on their VoIPs, or maybe in a situation where they're living in a team environment where they're all living together and the coach is in the room with them. You can't really police that in an online environment like you can in a LAN situation. Obviously, this Road to Rio, like everything right now during this coronavirus situation, is being done online. So there's a lot of different factors that go with that. I don't want to get into all the nuance of all the different complications with rule enforcement and whether or not this was a good decision, being able to vote on it or anything along those lines. But apparently, according to HLT report that came out today, where it finally was said that coaches will be allowed to communicate, apparently Valve was the one that requested there to be a vote. So it seems as though Valve may be considering, in line with the CSPPA and TOs, on how coaching should progress going forward. And I think this is finally the perfect opportunity for Valve to finally step in and get away from the silence. I mean, Valve has basically been silent about the coaching rule ever since they made the original rule, to my knowledge at least, 4 years ago almost. And this is pretty much in line with Valve in general. You know, they are very slow when it comes to weapon balance. We all know that with the SG and then the Tech 9 and the CZ of the past and different things. When it comes to game balance, they've notoriously just crawl at a snail's pace on making any changes that people really want in this game at the top competitive scene. And obviously, we all know about the bullshit that has been transpiring for years when it comes to the match fixing bans and how dead silent they've been or how ambiguous they have been with how they want to handle those types of things long term. Valve is so fucking frustrated when it comes to how they handle Counter-Strike Global Offensive, when it comes to balance, when it comes to, you know, issues with bans, and when it comes to there being no appeals process for bans and all these different things. I don't want to get into all that, but I'm just saying that Valve does not really have the greatest track record with communication with the CSGO scene. We often feel like we're the redheaded stepchild of Valve, right? You know, we're sitting here breaking fucking player records. We're one of the biggest esports of all time, and certainly one of the top esports in the current day. And meanwhile, we have a developer who feels, honestly, to me, like they're fucking asleep at the wheel half the time. And yeah, I don't want someone who's overly controlling and trying to dictate our game to us all the time. You know, yeah, you don't want there to be this super controlling, authoritative body over the game. We have a pretty good scene that we've been able to build up on our own with our different organizers at Open Circuit, but there are certain issues where we really could use Valve's influence and direction, and we could certainly use a hell of a lot more transparency in some of these really big situations. And I feel like this coaching situation is another situation that Valve really needs to come in and kind of get with the times. I feel like their ruling back in 2016 is far antiquated at this point. Again, basically the entire Open Circuit has already moved the direction towards letting coaches talk during freeze time and letting them be more involved in the game. Valve's ruling to only limit them to timeouts was certainly just like overdone. Like, sure, maybe it was indeed the case that coaches were getting too much responsibility or too much influence in the game. Maybe they were basically becoming, you know, pseudo in-game leaders, and that was really taking away the idea of there being a true IGL player. And yeah, maybe it was going the route of 6 players in the server almost in that regard rather than 5 players. And maybe that was too much, you know, that can be debated. But I think we can all kind of come to a compromise, at least, that coaches should be able to talk during freeze time, alongside the timeouts and alongside the pregame and the halftime. I think pretty much everyone's been on board with that. Valve, here's your chance to communicate, to be a bit more transparent, to be a bit more involved in the game, and to get pretty much a free fucking PR win. If you came out and said, from now on, our major circuit will allow coaching to basically be expanded past the rules we had made previously. We will still allow coaches to talk during 30-second timeouts, but we are also expanding it to allow coaches to talk during freeze time. You know, maybe everyone won't be satisfied still, but it'll certainly be more in line with what the consensus has kind of been, I feel like, for a long time now. I mean, again, this topic has festered up multiple times over the past couple of years, whether it be opinion pieces or how tournaments have changed their own ruling in the Open Circuit or whatever the case may be. It feels like the more and more that I hear, the more and more I hear that this is what people want and what people have already agreed to. So I hope that Valve can just take this easy win right now and kind of settle everything. Finally get coaching back up to being more influential and being more important. You know, coaches have obviously been able to kind of work with the current rules we have in place and still be able to be effective, some more than others, of course, and that'll never change no matter what the coaching rules are. But it would be nice to have something more uniform. You know, it would be nice to have something that feels more in line with where we are as a scene. And so I hope this is that moment. Hope you folks enjoyed the video. If you please subscribe for more. Catch you next time.